Next question here. Is it insecure to set secrets via, this is a statement. It's insecure to set secrets via environment variables. So what should we do? And this is true. Like, if we haven't been honest or transparent enough about it, like, look, we love 12-factor because 12-factor simplifies things from an application developer perspective, operations perspective, it all being the same interface, but creates problems from the SecOps perspective or the security perspective, because if this is running on shared infrastructure, you have access to the proc directory or can inspect process information. Environment variables are readily available to non-privileged users on the system. So 12-factor has been espousing this for years. How come we're using this for secrets? Well, path of least resistance. It's different things. Different companies have different problems that they need to solve and different risk tolerances. If you're a financial institution, maybe using environment variables is not copacetic. But if you're a WordPress blog and whatever, I don't know, maybe that's good enough. So this is where, like, basically any alternative is modifying your application to use whatever secrets stored directly, and then you're offloading that to the in-memory process space and binding and complicating local development. So what I love about environment variables is that we can use it in Docker Compose, we can use it deployed on ECS, we can deploy it to Kubernetes very easily as well, we can deploy it to Heroku. Everything does environment variables, and it's so easy to conceptualize. But once you say, we're gonna use ASM, okay, great. How are you gonna be doing that now in Docker Compose locally? It's gonna be much more complicated. So you end up straddling two things. So now developers are using environment variables locally, but you're deploying it using ASM, and you like trade-offs. Anything I oversimplified or recommendations for this?
I think it's a big difference.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's a big difference between being on some kind of multi-tenant platform versus being in like a container. I mean, doing secrets and environment variables on, an Ubuntu server or whatever that multiple people can log into is different than, using environment variables in a Kubernetes pod. Yeah. If you look at a Kubernetes pod, even if you have the secrets in a Kubernetes secret, the way you get them into the pod is you mount them as environment variables, usually.
Yeah. Yeah. At the chagrin of the CISO. But yeah, that is true. And the core admins will have the ability, obviously, whoever can access the host OS of the Kubernetes cluster can see those. But security is about layers. You pick the layers you want. And I think Andrew makes a good point. If you're containerizing, it helps. It's not the end all be all. It's just one more layer that makes it hard. Any counter arguments or people?
Yeah, I actually spent quite a bit of time this week. We're working on a greenfield project at my company, and I'm a huge fan of 12-factor and environment variables. To your point, it just makes everything so easy. But then the concern around security was brought up, and now we're exploring this hybrid solution of using environment variables if that's the only option, and the alternative being using a mount within Kubernetes to actually have a file, so like a config-based file, and having something like console. I think it's like I believe it's called a sidecar for console, with like I believe another container within the pod that'll just update the config file and essentially restart the container, is my understanding. We haven't actually deployed it yet. We're barely getting our console server and Vault infrastructure spun up, but maybe in a couple weeks I'll have something to show you guys.
Word of caution on that approach. It seems beautiful. There was CompD back in the day. Kelsey Hightower's project used it, and it was this nice thing. Look, this information changes over here. Rebuild the configuration. Send a SIG hub, and it short circuits all of these safety mechanisms in Kubernetes about how to deploy secrets, right? Because what you have in Kubernetes is you have to launch a new pod while the other one is running, and then that can pass or fail health checks, but at least your current pod is alive. And the problem when you automatically reload configs, like with a sidecar, is you're implementing, blackout, the blackout button for services. And how do you do that in a coordinated fashion? So, if that everything doesn't reload the config at the same time and you get a burst of queued connections or something, I don't know.
I can appreciate that. We're working on better practices where when we make big changes, basically it's backwards compatible is the hope. I mean, obviously that might fall over, but rather than just, for example, rotating the secret for the same username, ideally provision a new username, deploy that change, and then do a rolling deployment is what I'd expect. But yeah. We haven't rolled this out, and I have a feeling we're going to miss some things just like that. So.
Were you on the call when I've talked about Reloader? Are you familiar with Reloader?
No.
Reloader is really awesome. It's a controller you deploy to the cluster, and you can then tell it which, you use annotations to say which deployments it will monitor, or stateful sets, or replica sets, etc. And when the config map changes, it triggers a standard redeployment of those pods using whatever mechanism is there. So if you're using rolling updates, it'll use rolling updates.
Cool, thank you.
And so we've used this, like cert manager generates some keys. We need KIM to get those keys. So we have reloader reload KIM when the new keys are generated.
So you said you were going to put your secrets in files, right? And then mount them as files?
I believe it's like a secrets mount or something within Kubernetes. I have to double check. I think it's like, it's just a mount point. Like you...
as a file?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay.
So
my question is...
Yeah, sorry,
my question is, if you gain the ability to exfiltrate environment variables, what's the likelihood that you're not also going to be able to exfiltrate files?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't have the answer on that.
So you're adding a whole layer of complexity for really nothing, right? I mean, if they can exfiltrate environment variables, they can probably exfiltrate files also, and so you've done all that work, and you don't really gain any extra security.
That's a pretty good point. I'm gonna have to talk to my teammates about that one. I'm not probably sure. We did make an improvement to have the best of both worlds, being able to support both. At least with the plan that I've been shown, it's going to be using console, where apparently you can inject it as environment variables as well as a config file. But yeah, that's a really good point. I'm pretty confident you're right. Fortunately, on our current Kubernetes cluster, we have no SSH access. So even the issue around gaining access to the hosts doesn't really exist in our environment. But yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up.
If you can exec into a pod, you can get access to it.
Okay.
That's the normal, when I'm helping developers debug, the first thing I'd have to do is exec into a pod and go cat the config file to see if the values got injected during the deployment.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I've done that a few times.
I mean, exec happens over 443. It doesn't happen over 22.
Yeah.
The file can still be encrypted, and you have the key pulled somewhere else.
But then it's just another layer
How many turtles do you want to go down?
Right. It's like, okay, fine, your secrets are encrypted, but you've got to get your encryption key in there somehow, and so they can grab the encryption key and then decrypt your secrets. Like, it's just, it's layers all the way down.
So one thing I have done in the past, I wasn't happy with the solution, was you just check in an encrypted secret, like encrypt it with KMS, and then in memory have the application decrypt it using an IAM role or whatever. And I found that to be pretty good because it's all in memory, but
interesting solution. Yeah,
that breaks easy local development. You want easy local development. Yeah. And yeah, putting stuff in secrets manager, KMS, whatever is the safest way. You should definitely do that. But if your app is not cloud native, you're fucked. Excuse my language.
If you're a
You can't do it.
self-respecting developer, you're not going to want to do it.
You can do it. Look how Lambdas do it. Lambdas get a bunch of secrets, a bunch of configs, get a bunch of things. But development for that is fundamentally different. If you want to fix your secrets, you've got to fix your development environment. You've got to mature your application. You've got to get into fancy stuff. You cannot just take a tiny bit.
That was a really succinct way of putting it. I like it. I like it.
And just to play devil's advocate on all of this, like even if you triple encrypt, you go through all this, if I can get into your pod, I have access to the web identity token. And if I know your role, I can assume it. I can then call KMS to decrypt your file, and I now have access to your values. Yeah. Or if I'm able to do a memory core dump on your application, I've now got your secrets. Like, I think the way of dealing with this is understanding that somebody is going to steal your credentials at some point. How do you limit them? Like, what is the zone of impact that's going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, or just realize that, as soon as someone gains, shell access to your pod, you've lost the game. Like, you have to protect, so that they don't ever get that access in the first place.
Yes. So I forget the term now, but basically you create all your containers from scratch with a single statically linked binary. And that's probably the most defensible position from a container. No bash, there's not even shell, there's not even ls, there's nothing. It is an empty container with a statically linked.
Tell that to Python developers.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
also, if you put your secrets in AWS Secrets Manager, you can rotate them, and you can rotate them super, super, super often. That's nice. Like, you got my key. Well, it's old. It's 5 minutes old. I've rotated it. I don't care about it. But again, your app needs to be able to do that often. There's a whole thing for it.
And where you're generating those, usually you have to have both online concurrently for some overlapping period. So yeah, like it gets messy quick. RDS, perfect use case. Other situations, Datadog, you're not going to be rotating your Datadog keys easily that way.